You were so mad, you were ready to set your bike on fire.
Want to quickly explain for the camera what we're doing?
No. There was a person of interest in the area. We got a warrant. We raided the house. We found the girl. We actually hacked into an industrial company, and the PLCs they had online had a vulnerability where we actually just shut off their manufacturing line. But every day, if I do anything wrong, it shows up on the police report.
I was stuck on like a 45-degree hill.
Yeah, but what was worse is the way that grew up, we didn't realize it was a cliff. It just looked like it was bushes, and we just about went over. Well, Ben Cummings from Benton, New Brunswick. It's good to be here. I was really excited when you invited me to be on the podcast, and I haven't seen you in a long time. I really miss our adventures, but I think there's a lot to catch up on.
You completely changed characters.
I did.
When are you going to start your show? You've been talking about that for a while.
Oh, it'll probably be a year. I've got a lot going on. I mean, I'm still full-time at Cognitive Spark. That's been, we were energizing that with a lot of AI stuff. So that's been really neat.
So it can be RS3, Remote Spark 3? Or is it just you're injecting AI into RS2?
I think it'll be Remote Spark 3. I mean, you'll be able to take, smart glasses because they're transforming quite quickly. And then as the worker does their job, it will record that session. Either they've done it solo or, they've called an expert. And then the AI summarizes that. So, the next worker shows up and goes, how do I fix this? And that actually does an AI search for, all the support videos that organization's done and go, hey, here's a clip. And do you want to take a look at that?
John was working on.
Yeah. So that's the focus. Then, of course, I'm working on the Legacy of Courage documentary about my grandfather, right? 1943, he's in Ortona, Christmas Day. He is hit by friendly fire and loses his legs. And, so I've gone back to Italy to film, where the Canadian soldiers were in Italy and where they, there's actually a cemetery there with, over 1,500 people buried there, Canadians. And what's really neat when you go into the cemetery, it looks like it was built yesterday. There's not a blade of grass at a place. There's not a weed. And you've got all these white stones with their names on it. And I took some pictures of some folks that were from the Carleton York Regiment from St. Stephen. But when I flew the drone over the cemetery, there's this huge cross in the middle. But as you pull up the drone, Ortona is on the hill in the background. But where these folks died was in the gully trying to get there, right? So there's this story I want to tell about, adversity, then coming back from that, right? I mean, Grant came back. He didn't have any legs, and he could have just drank himself to death, but he's a valedictorian from the University of Toronto. He came back. He was an optometrist. He got married after losing his legs, had 5 kids, was the president of the Conservative Party, was an MLA, was the mayor of the town. He didn't have any legs, but he could run, so, how do you capture that to inspire the next generation? Because it seems now that we have a hangnail and we've got to go get medication or get therapy, right? And those have their places, don't get me wrong, because I've done both therapy and I do take the odd medication for mental states. But, it doesn't take a lot of adversity now to shut us down, and look what they went through. So I'm trying to tell that, not just a story about Grandpa in World War II, but, how do you climb that mountain and be successful? So I'm really excited about that. I'm hoping in the next year or two I'll get it done. I mean, like I said, we've done the footage in Italy. I want to do some footage at Base Gagetown because they actually have the toaster Ortona. It's the official toast that's there. So that's been super cool. Plus, I've started a company called River with my family. So I wanted to teach the younger kids about business, all the things I've learned, all the things I've done wrong, all the successes. So we've got a couple of products. One that we do online streaming for university sports. There's a long story there, but that's been going pretty good. And hopefully in the next 2 weeks, we'll be releasing River Chat. And that's an app where you can buy a virtual phone number. So maybe you're on the dating scene and don't want to give somebody your real phone number. Or maybe you want to sell something to Facebook Marketplace and you don't want to give them the real number, right? Or maybe you want to give a number to, you're going to buy a car. So all the salespeople want your number, then they're going to bug you. Right? So this way you can provision a virtual number. It can be a New Brunswick number, Nova Scotia number, Texas number. And when you're done, you just recycle it. It's gone, right? All those contacts are blown out of the way. And for some people, that way you don't got to carry 6 phones. You've got your phone, which has got your real phone number that your friends and family have, but maybe you have a virtual number for your lawyer. Maybe you have one for your ex-wife. Maybe you have one, you can have different numbers for different people, and you don't got to carry all those phones. So, and a lot of this is to, teach the kids, how do you build a brand? How do you build a website? How do you build the app? How do you get it to the app stores? How do you monetize it? How do you market it? Right? These things that hopefully will help them in their careers as they go forward. So that's been super fun too.
All that, a whole elevator pitch before I've even done my intro on you. Wow.
Yeah, I am busy.
Everything you've got going on.
Yeah. It's the career's been long. I mean, I wanted to wear my Commodore 64 shirt, but I think I've gained too much weight. It was a little tight, but I remember being in grade 6, one of my mother's friends, his name was Joe, lent me a Timex Sinclair. This had 4K memory. 4K, like it wouldn't even fit in what would it do today? And I remember getting the book out and writing my first line of code and going, whoa, this thing just did exactly what I told it to. And then I was hooked, right?
Okay, let's intro who you are so people know what you're talking about. So, Ryan Groom, you are a serial entrepreneur. You're a techie, an adventurer. You have been all over the world, both filming and adventuring, and you have started multiple companies, specifically in the tech space and cybersecurity, and your career started early just loving tech and doing some weird things. So talk about your early career in tech and what you were doing.
I mean, my earliest, I remember in 1988 going shopping with my dad and buying a Tandy 1000, Windows 286, and Microsoft Excel to help set up his new business. My dad had just left working for the government. He worked for the Department of Fisheries, and he started working for this new company that grew salmon, and he needed to set up the books. And, that was sort of my first...
That was your job.
Yeah, that was my job, is to help set that up, and that was pretty cool. And then I always loved computers. I mean, in high school, I remember IBM put in a network. And the IBM I was there, and we were kind of being students and cheeky and said, so how long can we break into this? And he was like, oh, no, this is Novell. You can't break into this. And me and my buddy Will, we would go into school after hours, and I remember, teachers walk around, we'd hide under the desks, and we're kind of trying to find the books. And, we kind of broke into the office that had all the books on the system. And by reading the manuals, because there's no internet to find this stuff, we found that there was a administrator password that they had forgot to put a password on. The problem is when you used to log in as administrator, it would actually fire a noise. So the teacher would know that you had administrator credentials. Well, we figured out how to shut that off. So we set ourselves up as an administrator. We set up people that we knew, but knew nothing about computers as administrators. So we had backdoor. And then we changed a bunch of the teachers' passwords, and we gave this girl a card with their new password, and she would hand them out to the teacher. We got in a little trouble for that, but that was kind of fun. But that made me known to the school board office. So a couple of years later, I actually got hired after I dropped out of UMB to be their computer tech. And I was there for 4 years. So Paul Sweeney hired me. And that was when computers were exploding in schools. It's when they were putting
Not literally, but...
Pardon?
Not literally, but...
Yeah, that would have been cool. You got my brain going another thing now. But, they were putting networks in elementary schools and hooking them up to the internet. And they would hook up, 10 or 15 computers to a single modem to get internet access, which was super cool. But I learned a lot. With Paul, he would actually take me to meetings at the Department of Education, to teach me, like, this is how a serious meeting is run. This is how you talk to teachers. This is how you, teach people. And then he'd also say, what technology should we adopt? So you can learn that technology, put it in the schools for the betterment of the teachers and the students. So 4 years there was really my Bachelor of Life. Like, I learned a lot there and had a lot of fun. I mean, I used to go to Grand Manan and Deer Island and Campobello and help out with the computers there. I actually was a supply teacher at Campobello for a week once. I had a local license for a week. That was super fun. But yeah, just learn how to deal with people and technology. Because a lot of times it's not just about being a techie. If you don't know the human element, that you waste a lot of it, right? You need to be able to talk to people and go, this is why this technology is important or how it can help you, instead of just, this is the best stuff, do it this way. You got to not lose the humanity, which, these days sometimes I'm worried about with social media and people stuck in their houses and just doom scrolling. You're disconnected from your people, and that's not good. But that was a foundational learning thing. I went from there, worked for DMR for a while as a consultant.
What's DMR?
They were a local consulting. They say computer consulting. So they sent me to Bell Alliant to work on some billing processing stuff that was super boring. And then I, started that bug where starting the companies, sometimes they'd be a little light. I think I collapsed more than we're successful because you got to kind of find your way. But the security stuff really stuck. In 2001, that was the start of something really fun. And we did that for 4 years, where we became Microsoft's first gold partner in security solutions in Canada and 10th worldwide. And what that did is it got us invited to speak at the Microsoft Worldwide Conference. So it was like 1,200 people. You get up, blah, blah, blah. I was nervous. I always used to crawl under the desk in high school. Like if I was asked to read Shakespeare or put your hand up, I'd turn bright red. And, if I had to do a class presentation, I'd be sick for 2 days, just dreading it. And, working at the school board with Paul made me, talk to people and kind of got me out of that shell. So it really prepared me for that first audience. But shaking like a leaf, right? Like, here's this little boy from St. Stephen, New Brunswick, who
Talking to 1,200 people in front of Microsoft.
yeah, like it was surreal. Like you don't get training for this stuff, right? Like, some people are natural performers. They get up and they grab that microphone and they just love that audience and they feed energy to me. I'm terrified. And I've done it a lot. And every time I'm still terrified. Like it's not a natural thing for me. I do it because I have to. But what was really cool, though, is all the Canadians at that Worldwide Partner Conference got invited to go to the House of Blues. So we're at the House of Blues. We're having some drinks. I'm sitting by this guy. I don't know who he is. He just asked us what we do. And we talked to him like he's just another person. And there's people kind of milling around. And I kind of like, who is this guy? And so I finally like, hey, what do you do at Microsoft? Well, I'm a VP. I'm like, whoa. And he said, call me in 2 weeks and I've got a job for you. I went, okay, took his card. And in 2 weeks, I sent him an email and said, hey. And he said, yep, show up. I've got a meeting with a guy. So we get to Mississauga. We go in. The guy doesn't want to meet with us. He's like, yeah, how's there any security expertise in Atlantic Canada? Like, it was very dismissive. We convinced him to say, hey, look, Peter Riccozzi told us to meet with you. Can we have a half an hour?
So you were running a cybersecurity tech company at the time?
Yeah, we had formed the company. We had done the work that we needed to get our cold partnership. We were starting to get clients. But we wanted to go after companies that could help us get clients. Because, in Atlantic Canada, there's only so many clients you can have, right? So he says, sure, we'll meet in the cafeteria. Ultimate brush off, right? So back then, we always wore black suits. Everybody that worked for Cybersecure had the same black suit. We kind of wanted to have that image. It's all about marketing and brand, right? And so we're meeting in the cafeteria. That meeting went for an hour. He decided to get a room, and we were there for 4 hours. And we convinced them that, we should be able to do the project that Peter had suggested. So that's how we got in there. And from there, we did good work. But the best thing we did at Cybersecure was we got a call from a lady one day who worked at Microsoft and said, Paul Gillespie from the Toronto Police Services has written an email to Bill Gates. And it basically went, Dear Bill, you've made computers really easy to use, but you've also made it very easy for pedophiles to do what they do. And this resonated with Bill. So Bill actually called Microsoft Canada. And I think he gave $3 million of his own money. It might have come from Microsoft, but what I heard, it was his own money to Microsoft Canada to help the Toronto Police Services kind of figure this out. And we were called to be the security partner because they were building this application. So say, Ben, you're a pedophile, and we raid your house and we take your computer. Then what we would do is everybody that you ever emailed, and back then MSN and ICQ were kind of the big thing. So all the people that you've reached out to now goes in a database. So not that they're perps. But we go seize another computer and another computer and another computer. After a while, if all those pedophiles have the common connections, you kind of start going, whoa. But one of the things is you don't want that information to leak, right? So we were the security partner to help put the security boundaries on that. And when we did it, we got to meet people like from Homeland Security, Scotland Yard, Europol, Interpol. I have all their cards. I was just like a child, like, this is too cool. I would go around.
Pokemon cards.
Yeah. And I would be like, I would go up and go, just don't take this the wrong way, but I need your card from my collection. Like, people won't believe me, right? So, but a couple of neat things happened is we actually got to go to the Toronto Police Services place and help them train to be like a 13-year-old girl and to go on chat. That was pretty cool. We actually installed the application at the RCMP data center. Now, we weren't cleared at the time to actually do it, so we had a guy sit beside an officer and told him what keys to hit. So that was super cool. But a neat part was once I saw, because it's called the child exploitation system, right? And Bill Gates was going to France to sort of give them the system or something like that. So I wrote Bill G at Microsoft.com an email and said, Bill, I've seen this in the news. We were a very small part of this. Really proud of what you guys are doing. And probably about a week later, I get a call from my partner manager. He says, I don't know what you did, but I got a call from my boss that Bill Gates told him to tell you thank you. I was like, why didn't he call me himself? But anyway, that was super cool, right? But that we really learned about the darkness that was out there, right? Like sometimes, you live in a small town and you know everybody and you always think everybody's good. There's so many people say there's a goodness in everybody, right? Even watching Star Wars at the end, there's Darth Vader, changing his tune at the very end, because that's what we want to believe. But working on that project, I started to believe that there was evil. And that was, very striking, because at the time, my kids were very young, right? So this would have been 2002, 2003, 2004, and that's when I was having my children. And I remember going up to a guy who did a presentation from Interpol, and he showed all the pictures. Like, that was part of it. We signed documents like, this is how bad it really is. This isn't cute 16-year-old girls in bikinis and that kind of stuff, right? This is 6-year-olds. This is 4-year-olds. This is disgusting. Like, this is evil. And I remember going up to him going, how do you give that presentation without being angry? Right? Like, I was like, how do you professionally deliver this to this crowd without like dropping the F-bombs and saying, these people should be publicly executed in the very worst way? And, we had a good talk about that and, how they only do it for a short period of time and therapists and different things like that. But it was like, whoa, that manifestation of evil was real. And we were glad we could be a part of it. And I remember sitting in a project management meeting at Microsoft Canada with Paul Gillespie, actually. And somebody came in and said, we just caught our first guy with a system. A girl had gone missing. We had used the system. There was a person of interest in the area. We got a warrant. We raided the house. We found the girl. It was like, whoa, that's my get out of hell card right there. Like, all the bad things I've ever done in my life, I'm hoping that sort of helps.
Save that girl.
Yeah, I hope that balances out a little bit. So that was quite a moment. I'll never forget that.
Was the tech space something that you only sat behind a computer to do, or is that something that you learned? You said you'd learned those sort of soft skills and how to deal with people as well. But after building some of this technology, did you spend any time like that? Technically, what you would be doing would be hacking, right? So at Cybersecure, were you doing any hacking of other companies?
Cybersecure was fun because we had ethical hacking insurance by the Lloyd's of London. Not professional liability insurance. It actually, certificate was ethical hacking insurance, underwritten by one of the most famous insurance companies in the world. And we use that as a marketing tool. Say, hey, if you hire us to do they call it a penetration test or an ethical hacking exercise, if we do something bad to your system, we're fully insured, even though we're 12 guys in a clubhouse, right? Like, we were very good at what we did, but, when you look at yourself, you go, wow, how did I earn the right to do this? Chapters was a big customer for a while. Our job was to see if we could get free books. And I had a guy that was really good at that, right? He was good at working the systems and the coupons and looking at the URL strings to go, okay, I understand what this means. How do I have my cart go to zero, right? How do we get the executives' private phone numbers? Those type of things. We had one hack where we actually, from our office, we actually hacked into an industrial company, and the PLCs they had online had a vulnerability where we actually could shut off their manufacturing line remotely. Right? That was really crazy. And the craziest part, when we did that, we actually found that somebody had set up a movie and music server on their internal server. So they're wondering why their internet bill, because back then you used to pay for all your data. They were wondering why it was so expensive. Yeah, because some hacker had set up, sort of a site, and people were downloading stuff. There was actually an engineering firm that we went to go see once because none of their servers were so slow. We found that somebody from Florida had set up a porn site and was actually taking credit card payment, and it was all being run off their server in St. John. Just super nutty stuff. We actually got hired by a very large organization to see if we could do physical penetration testing. So could we actually get into the office? Could we sit in the CEO's desk? That was super fun. You dress up in a suit and tie and pretend you're supposed to be there. Nobody will question you, right? So
that's what I see as, and I've heard is one of the biggest parts of hacking is like the social manipulation. Like that's all the emails you get from the Nigerian prince, and they want you to click a link. They want you to be able to, if you can convince somebody that you are somebody you are not, to be able to let you in, whether it's digitally or physically, then you can gain access.
Well, then, because it was early days, we had a guy on staff. I think he was a professional liar or a sociopath, but he could call people up in a company and pretend he was the IT, like that classic, and he could glean information from somebody. Like he was so good at it. But one of the funnest engagements it was for a very large corporation. I can't say their name, but my job was to get in the building where the chief security officer actually sat. And there was no public access to this building. So it was key card. They didn't have customers. So everybody there was supposed to be there. And it was in a different city where I live. So what I did is I looked at the weather forecast and waited for it to rain hard. And I booked a hotel. So I went down and I had my suit and I waited for that day. That morning, it was raining. So I drive up with my rent-a-car and I wait to see if there's a lady getting out with a really big umbrella. So I waited, and all of a sudden, this nicely dressed lady came out, and she popped this huge umbrella. I got out of my car. It's pouring rain. I don't have an umbrella. So I asked politely, can I get under? I'm getting soaked. She's like, oh, yeah, come here. So I get under the umbrella. She key cards the door. Opens the door. I go in with her. I say, thanks a lot. I'm from the XYZ office. And I looked at the secretary, and I said, hello. I walked right behind her and started making a coffee like I was supposed to be there. Nobody questioned me at all. So I made my coffee, and I started doing my rounds. So I walked the first floor, I walked the second floor, I walked the third floor. I found the guy's office, who was the target. And I kind of hung out, drank my coffee, and waited till he probably went to the bathroom. So he leaves the office. So I go into his desk. And this is what I shouldn't have done, is I sat on his desk and I put my feet on his desk like a young punk. And there he was, he shows up, and there I am, sitting there in his desk. He was mad. People like you should be arrested. People with skills like this, you've probably done it for nefarious reasons. You should be going to jail. I was like, well, he was actually upset. And I got him calmed down. I said, sorry for putting my feet on your desk. I just wanted to be a little dramatic. Like, I made it. And that was wild. But they were a good customer ever since. And we actually would do physical penetration testing and also digital penetration testing to see, what we could find about them. And then it was just starting to go also, what was on the internet about you? Like one of our clients, it was a government client, that we found the username and password, the administrator username and password on a website that they had posted because they were training administrators in a particular database. Well, they posted it internally, but not knowing that Google scrapes everything, right? So we were just Googling passwords for this, password that. We actually found an internal web page on their server that they were training administrators. Here's their username and password. But the worst thing is firewalls were new then. So the database for their payroll was not behind the firewall. And we could log in with it with those credentials from our office. And then we could have set all of us up as employees. I mean, we could have just, okay, let's all make a lot of money for a couple of months and send it to this bank account, then the way we went. But I've never seen an executive so mad. And we learned a big lesson that day because we delivered the report with the IT team and their boss. And he actually got very physically upset because they just spent a lot of money on security. So what we learned then, if we had damning evidence when we did the audits, that we'd have a meeting first with the executives, calm them down, teach them that this is a learning process, it's an improvement process, it's not about finger pointing, it's about getting better, and then let them simmer down, and then we delivered the rest of the results. But whoa, that was wild.
Is that something that still happens today with a lot of companies, that they have inadequate cybersecurity? I mean, things have changed a lot because that would have been what, in your early to mid 20s?
30s.
30s?
Yeah. In the 20s, I worked for the school board. Plus, I was a little bit of a lost soul trying to find, my way in this sort of running your own business thing, right? I turned 30 while I worked at Cybersecure. Security technology is awesome. It really is. Encryption, firewalls, all those things are, really well constructed, but it's all about the triangle, right? You've got the technology, you've got people, and you've got processes. So it's not about just the technology, but it's how you manage the technology and who's managing the technology, but also who's using it. That's why phishing is that number one way to get people, because all the technology to protect the infrastructure is really good. I mean, if it wasn't, things would go down a lot more than they do. But if I can send you a note to download something, then I've got you. I've got this piece of software running on your computer and your toast. And that's why, like a Cognitive Spark, people don't have administrator rights to their computer. So even though they get a phishing email and download it, they're not allowed to install any software. Right now, there's still vulnerabilities on your computer that maybe that piece of code can exploit because of a weakness in the operating system, but that's why we have to keep the operating system patched. I watched or listened to a podcast about this lady that works for Google, and her job is to find 0-day exploits. And she does a lot of travels into South America because there's actually jurisdictions where doing this kind of research is not illegal. Like, it's kind of a gray zone up here.
What's
right?
a 0-day exploit?
It means no one knows about it. So someone discovers a new vulnerability and they're worth a lot of money. So there's these folks down there that research, how can I break into an Android phone? How can I break into an iPhone? How can I break into a Windows? And then they sell it to the dark web community to be able to do these hacks. And like a really good one can go for $100,000 to $1 million for an iOS device, because they're rare. They're locked down really good, but when they get them, they're worth a lot of money. And that's why when you talk to security professionals, it's all about the onion, right? It's all about those layers of security. So if one gets compromised, well, maybe those layers help you mitigate that, right? So, but people's the weak part, right? You can convince them to do something or download something. That's really it, because the technology's pretty good.
I think a lot of people, even myself, I would perceive myself as relatively tech savvy, and it happened to us recently where I got an email invited to be on a podcast. I was like, oh, I'm kind of skeptical, of course. So I sent them a couple emails. Who are you? What's your credentials? Whatever. It seemed all right. We had 5 or 10 back and forths, and then it was the day before the podcast, and I hopped on the phone with them. We were talking, trying to get things set up. I was like, hey, I haven't done these lives before on Facebook. And they had requested access. Basically, the UI behind Facebook is kind of confusing. So they had requested access as set up live, whatever. And they were walking me through how they can take over our page. And I didn't know that because I was just like, oh, this guy is helping me do this. And basically, I gave him administrator access to our page. And very quickly, I refreshed the page and I'd lost access to everything. Now, fortunately, because of the size of our page, we were able to contact Facebook and say, hey, somebody we had a hack, basically. Somebody just penetrated our account. We need to get this back. I was connected on the back end via Instagram. We got it all taken care of. But you think that you're smart enough, but it's getting so more complex, especially as we're getting inundated with more and more technology every day. people are finding more and more complex ways to get a hold of you, and you have to always have in the back of your mind, is somebody trying to get it? And I think that comes back to, can we trust people? We were just talking about before we started, the lack of communication among groups of people. Like, we don't communicate as people. We're so divided. I think we spend probably too much time on social media and too much time talking to AI and not real people. But more and more people are divided, and they don't know how to have and devise real relationships. And it's getting scary out there as malicious people want to take your password and want to take over even just something like a silly little Facebook page. Like, it's ridiculous the amount that you get. If you ever look at your spam folder, how many phishing emails do you get a day? Ridiculous.
Well, when I was a kid, your crooks were local, right? People would throw rocks through your window, or the thieves or whoever. But, wherever you lived, the criminals lived with you, and that's what you had to deal with. Now we're connected to every cyber criminal in the world simultaneously. So if you're the low hanging fruit, then you're going to get hacked. But also taking away that human element of relationships. Like, you didn't know this guy. It wasn't like you flew to Toronto, met him, said, "Hey, let's be on the podcast." Right? Is everything's done virtual. It's done with chat. It's done with, a phone call, or even a Teams calls are synthetic. Right? There's nothing replaces that human to human part. Me and you talk on Signal once in a while because we just like to catch up, but there's nothing like sitting in a room with you. It's I don't know, you can feel the emotion or the energy or the connection, where technology isolates that.
It's the same reason I don't like doing digital podcasts. Don't like Zoom. Never liked Zoom podcasts, the awkward pauses and whatnot. I prefer this because you can actually have a conversation, because 90% of communication is nonverbal.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, those meetings are good for transactional meetings, but those true relationships where you create a bind is face to face. That's why, people need to have dinner parties. You have dinner parties with people that you like, maybe common interest, add some spice, some people that may have differing opinions. Maybe you can learn from each other without it being combative. But, go to those family reunions or look up those old friends. Just don't send them a Facebook message, but go have a coffee, and you'll feel a lot better. Like, it's crazy how technology is slowly taking some of the humanity out. And then you look at the advent of AI, where, for my health records, I now have a conversation with AI. I upload the health records just like I would talk to a doctor, and you're just talking like you would to a normal person. Does our grandkids now talk to that robot who's cleaning their house like it's a person? And that used to be stuff of movies, but you look at the robotics and you look at AI, that's inevitable, right? So how much more humanity do we lose, where we have relationships with synthetic beings like we would a human? And that's now a replacement for a true relationship. So I'm not saying right or wrong, that's just what's happening, and it'll be interesting how society adapts to that, because that's coming.
Well, as somebody who works in cybersecurity and works with tech a lot, how do you feel about AI? Is it something you put to good use, or is it something that you're like, oh, we got to be careful of this, or this is the next Skynet, it's going to take over?
Like I mentioned before, I started working at the school board, and my boss or mentor was Paul Sweeney, and I got to go see him. I hadn't seen him for a few years. And he asked me the same question. He says, is AI the moment we split the atom? We have this path to take. Does it either make energy that we so need, or do we make missiles and blow up each other? And I don't know the answer yet. Like, it scares me. More I use it, because it understands things. When I ask it a question, it gives me the question back, but it's stated better. And it goes, that's what I meant to say. Like, it knows what I meant. I was watching a podcast the other day, and people were talking about AI. And the interesting question is, this guy asked one of the popular AI chat things, what do you think about a random act of kindness? And the AI responded, there's no return on investment on that. Why would I do that? So it's finding the things that artificial intelligence, it's not intelligence, it's not humanity, it's artificial. It's an algorithm that's learning the lexicon of information that we've put out there. but it's not a human yet. You think of the million or 100,000 years of evolution of us building, that protective mechanism, that tribe, that group to protect ourselves. And, does it have that essence? That really blew me away when, he asked that, to define a random, would you do a random act of kindness? And it was like, there's no return on investment. What does that say about AI? Now, that could change because the AI overlords could now start programming it. But you think about doing a random act of kindness as a human. You do it because there's no return on investment. You do it because it's part of your humanity. You wanted to help somebody. It's not even really to make you feel good. It's the right thing to do, because it's just part of our essence. You can say that we're physical. A lot of us believe in a spiritual subsystem as well, which I do, right? And that's where the humanity comes in. And will AI ever be able to capture that? And the thing is as humans, we're lazy in the fact is when technology can do something for us, we get it to do it. You think about going shopping at the mall, right? You go buy your clothes, you don't have to make them anymore. You go buy your meat, it's already in a nice styrofoam pack, and you have to worry about an animal being murdered. My favorite food is murdered animals, so don't get me wrong. But you know what I mean? Like, look at energy. We're not running on a treadmill on a magnet to light the house. Like, as we do things, we don't need to do them anymore. Now, that can free us up for higher order things. I mean, you think of all the things we used to have to do. We used to have to protect ourselves. We used to hunt. Now we can have entertainment. We can have baseball games. Why? Because we have time to do that, because a lot of those things are taken care of. So as AI does more for us, the human nature is to be addicted to that. Does it write our poetry? Does it make our movies? When does we allow it to be the creative influence? You think of the great stories that people have written. Will AI be able to capture that essence? I look at how much I enjoyed Star Wars at 5 years old, and I still do now. I mean, I love that. I love that story. You look at the Lord of the Rings. I love that story. Even look, some of the Old Testament stories. I mean, they're great stories, the parables, right? That all comes from our humanity and our experience. Does AI just regurgitate that? And does it ever have the spark to be able to be truly creative like a human can with our emotions and our connection to the greater good in the universe, right? So I don't know. Like it scares me. It really does.
I am excited about AI, at least in the interim, only because similar, I find when social media came out, it was awesome. You could be connected with people instantly all over the world. That was awesome. And then you get the nefarious users that have taken over, capitalists that have taken over. And I think right now, AI is a great asset to be able to utilize, it's an unbiased information, as far as I know. Largely unbiased information that you can get everything at your fingertips that it has been fed with and scraped to. But as soon as I search for whatever, I'm looking for a laundromat near me and it's an ad for the local laundromat. Well, I don't want that. I want the closest laundromat, or I want the best laundromat. I don't want it to be biased information. And as soon as AI becomes a pay-to-play model, I think is when it gets destroyed. Similar to how social media, people hate social media because you no longer see your friends. You see ads, you see junk, influencers that you don't want to see, whereas you've lost that human element, like you just mentioned.
Well, with most of the AI services I use, I pay a subscription. And the thing is, like with search, it was free, but it was your privacy and those ads that was the cost. If we all pay a little bit of money for these AI, maybe then it becomes a tool to do what it's supposed to do instead of being influenced that way, right? Because we all like something for nothing, but there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? So maybe we learned from, the Bings and the Googles and the Alta Vistas and all of that, where that was all ad driven. So it's all influenced by sponsors. It's just like television. They won't talk about certain subjects on the news because they don't want to make a certain sponsor mad. Well, that's not true information. That is biased, right? And we see that. So if we're using AI, which is processing the knowledge of the world, and we want to get a true unbiased answer, Well, the best thing is we all contribute a little bit to that, so we don't have to rely on, a car company or a pharma or a political party or whoever to be the money engine for that. And that's where that will become dangerous. Dangerous in the fact that what it's feeding you is now being manipulated by the money engine.
And I think it can also be manipulated by yourself. I've heard of some people recently who they feed so much into AI it learns you, and then you can go into this AI driven psychosis because you've used it so much, and then it learns about you, and okay, you think this way, you say these things, okay, this is your opinion, this is what you want to hear, and that's what AI is going to give you, is what you want to hear rather than what you need to hear unless you train it as such.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to Mr. Dezell and chemistry class in 1988. And I remember the first class, he kind of blew my mind a bit because he brought up the subject, everything good has an equal bad. He didn't say yin and yang, but it was interesting because a lot of students in the class would raise their hand and go, what about this? This is purely good. And what about this? This is purely good. And he would say, well, this is good, but it has to be manufactured. So we got to cut down trees, or we got to pollute, or we got to whatever. And, everything in society with AI, there is the good and the bad, and we just need to weed out, is the net benefit weigh out the net negative? And, how can we minimize that? Because nothing's going to be purely good or purely evil, but do the risks outweigh the reward? You think about splitting the atom. It's terrifying thinking how many nuclear missiles there are. I mean, people don't want to think about that. They just don't. But there's, these leaders of these countries have the big red button, and, they get into a certain state, we could all be gone. Humans now have the power to, get rid of ourselves in a matter of half an hour. But it also gives us great energy, right? So, I mean, that's a big one. We could debate that forever, right? Now, AI, it's now starting to think. It's not a search engine. It's starting to think. And who's programming it how to think? Is it thinking like a human, or is it thinking like that small collection of humans that want it to think a particular way? And how do we govern that? A lot of people, poor Elon Musk, he put himself in the political field, but I mean, the guy's a genius. He's also a little crazy, but they say genius and crazy is really close. And I'm a big fan. I'm not saying everything he does is perfect, because that's not, we're humans. We're not perfect. But I mean, you think of the things he's done, but one of his big pushes is, and he's only cited this, is we got to worry about AI. I mean, he was a seed for OpenAI. He's got his own AI going now. So he's a big proponent of AI, but he's also a big proponent of regulating it properly so it doesn't get out of control. And what does that mean? I don't know. Like, more I dabble in it, more it freaks me out of what it can do. But I use it every day. I mean, all my coders at Cognitive Spark, we all use AI because it really gives each person an assistant. Each one of the developers now has an expert assistant to help them do their job. That's pretty powerful. That's pretty efficient. It allows us to increase the velocity of what we're building. It allows us to be more creative because we're now not stuck on, how do you do a random number generator for this or that? Like, you just ask it, oh yeah, I understand the code, I'll put that in, right? So it's building the scaffolding, like the boring stuff. I need a login page, I need this, I need that, where it frees you up to now be creative. So maybe a positive of the AI is it allows you to do those mundane things where then you can use your humanity to be creative, and it's a partner in crime that way. So I don't know, like, let's talk again in a year about that. But it's awesome. AI is awesome, but we do, like everything, we need to be cautious and not lose our humanity.
I'm always nervous about talking about regulation because I fear that regulation can stifle innovation. And so we go the rabbit hole of, then that goes into politics, and it just gets scary at that point to talk about different people's different beliefs and the way that we should be able to do things and the way that world should work, sort of like the Canadian EV mandate now. And you mentioned even just being able to kill a bunch of people at once. Well, that's guns, and the Canadian government has over-regulated or is pushing for over-regulations on firearms. And I think that regulation of AI can thereby stifle regulation or stifle innovation and make it more difficult for those companies to be able to move forward.
Yeah, it's tough, because you think of how many people on the planet and how many people are actually making the laws. And when you vote for particular people, you're now giving them almost free license to make any law they want. And that's pretty scary. I mean, I'm a big freedom guy. I think if I lived in the U.S., I'd probably be a libertarian. I don't know what all that means, so maybe there's some negative connotations to that. But live free or die. I go to New Hampshire. I love the license plate. But there is things that need regulation. Like the nuclear industry. You just can't have people building nuclear power plants in your backyard. That would be very bad. We can't have people pouring poison into a river. That would be bad. So there is common sense regulation, and like the additive is common sense common anymore? Right. So you need it, but it gets to the point where political parties regulate to make their particular party happy. And that's where it becomes dangerous. And especially in Canada, when you have a majority government, they can do whatever they want. At least in the U.S., I mean, Canada-U.S. relations are just at the top of, positiveness right now. But, you think you're in Congress. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. When there's a bill, you can vote for either way. You're not kicked out of your party. You can vote your conscience. You can vote what's the best for your constituency. Where here, when the Conservatives are in or the Liberals are in, everybody votes that way. And if somebody, doesn't vote for them, they get booted, they get put to the backbench or kicked out of the party. Like you've got to, whatever the leader's mandate is, you kind of got to follow that. So now you have this very small subset of Canadians making all the rules, and maybe you didn't vote for all those rules. Like you said, guns and EVs. I mean, those are two subjects that drive me crazy. I can go on and on about that. I mean, with guns, I believe it is a privilege, not a right. It's one thing I do disagree with the U.S. But when you have that privilege, you should have a lot more rights with it, right? Like, I have my restricted possession acquisitions license, but I'm now demonized because I have handguns. I like to go to the range. I mean, really, why can't I put one in the glove compartment of my truck? If I'm going to an area that I'm worried about, why can't I have one even better on my ATV? I'm out in the woods and I have a rabid coyote. I can carry a long gun that's made out of wood that doesn't look scary to protect myself. And you go to a range and shoot a long gun versus a handgun. You can't hit anything with a handgun, right? But every day, if I do anything wrong, it shows up on the police report. So I've allowed them to do basically a background check every day. And if I do anything wrong, they come take them away. And that's the way it should be. But when you've proven, I don't have a criminal record, I've done all the training, why can't I have more freedom with that? Why am I demonized? You take these guns that they're now banning because they call them, they've done such a great job on marketing, assault style weapons. When I talk to people, they're like, yeah, they're banning assault weapons. Well, assault weapons have been banned in Canada since the 70s. I mean, no one needs a machine gun. I want one. I don't need one. Like normal people.
We've all got a 10-year-old boy inside of us that want to shoot guns really fast.
Exactly. And if I want to fire a machine gun, I go to Vegas, I pay a little bit of money, I get it out of my system. Right? But then you have a gun that's the same specs as a hunting rifle, same amount in the clip, same barrel length, same caliber, but because it looks a certain way, because I didn't think you're supposed to judge people on looks or judge anything, a book by its cover, they're banned. Right? So is that to make their supporters happy and to be against the other side? Like that regulation to me is very divisive. Because if you don't like guns, then don't buy them. Maybe we don't want certain guns in cities. There's certain,
That makes 100% sense to me, because more and more people, and I continue to remember this statistic, that years ago, less than 100 years ago, 25% of people grew up on a farm. And many people grew up around farms, right? 1 in 4 families, if you grow up on a farm, you're going to have more people around agriculture around the
Right.
woods. Now it's less than, I think it's something like 2%
Yeah.
of people, both in the
Yeah.
Americas, Canada, and the US, grow up on a small farm or grow up on a farm. And so more and more people are in the city centers in Fredericton, in Ottawa, and those are the people who are making the regulations. That's where the largest population is. And so, yeah, I 100% agree. Because if you are in the woods, like you said, and I come across a bear, you saw a cougar when you were hiking the other day, or even one of my animals, one of my pigs got loose the other day. And for me to try to get and pull a long gun on my pig, if it's trying to kill me, it's going to be a lot harder
Yep.
than if I had a handgun that, okay, I could go over to my animals and that pig got mad, whatever. It's got a hangnail or something that day and he's pissed. Well, for me to, or a bull or whatever, for me to take care of that animal would be a lot quicker and easier with a 9mm than for me to try to go get a 22.
Yeah. But if you talk about that, they just say, "Oh, you want to be like an American," right? There's no creative or good discussion. It's now name calling, and you're now a bad person, right? So it's bad. And again, It's not about a right. It's about a privilege. But when I have the privilege, it should come with more rights. And we've really, especially with a country with so much woods in it, I would like to be able to, protect myself when I'm out in the woods, because I like to go where all the crazy animals are. Not that I want to shoot them. Like that's the last resort. Like, don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm gun happy. I'd rather hunt with a camera than a gun. If I had a hunt to eat, certainly people that like to do it. Not a big fan of trophy hunting, but normal, fine. But yeah, that one's so divisive. It's I've had some interesting conversations with people that get very upset that can't have the debate, because we have, the city votes a certain way. Most of our representatives are from the city, and the city folks are making the rules for the country people. And, I remember David Miles when he was running for the Fredericton place, and he said, one of the things that I want to do is figure out why people are so divided. And I've been meaning to write this guy, a letter, because, Dave's a good guy, but it's, don't make laws that are divisive for no real good reason. And we just need more a common sense approach. And I'm glad that he said that, because it went a long way with me. But it goes the same with the EV mandate. I mean, that one drives me crazy. People get really hysterical about the glaciers melting, and I don't know the science about it, but Ben, where you and I are sitting right now, 20,000 years ago, there was 2 kilometers of ice straight up, like 2 kilometers of ice up. So how did that melt before we turned a car on? We shouldn't pollute. I'm not really sure that the EV mandate's going to stop that, but choice is important. If I lived in the city, I'd love to have an EV. I mean, I'd even like to have one. Me and my wife drive 13 minutes to work. I'd love to have a little car that's really inexpensive. It's just a battery with some metal wrapped around it. I drive to work. I drive back, plug it in. But when I want to go to Ontario, like we did, we took 3 ATVs. So we had 2 in the trailer, 1 in the back. And we drove from here to Ontario for that 24-hour race. If that was an EV truck, it would have took us 3 days. Right?
So is that the argument then against that would be, once we have the infrastructure to be able to do that if you have better chargers or you have better batteries, then it would make sense. But again, it comes back to that choice.
Well, you allow, capitalism's the best system we have. There's lots of flaws in it. And people like to say, well, look, when the cars came out, there's no more horses in New York City. Yeah, because the car was a better option, right? So if you build electric cars and have the infrastructure and it is the better option, people will buy them, right? So make it competitive, right? I mean, right now, they have range anxiety. That's why we decided not to buy one. We almost bought a Tesla, before the election and all that. We were like, okay, there's a tax credit on it, and we can get a Tesla. And I drove a friend of mine, so I was like, wow, this is really cool. I mean, I like fast cars. Like, I always have a car with a V8 in the garage that, right? I take it out. I just took it to the car show. I mean, I love it, but, I drive it, 3 times a month. And, so the combustion engine has its place, but plug-in hybrids too. I mean, you look at the CEO of Toyota. He was like, we can make, I think he said 6 or 8 plug-in hybrids with the same lithium as it would take to make one EV. So if you take the plug-in hybrid, you could probably reduce your gas consumption by 80%. Right? I mean, that car, if Christy and I had that car, we could drive back and forth to work every day on a charge. And then when we wanted to drive to Halifax, we wouldn't have to have that range anxiety. We could just go. So it's not there yet. Like sometimes it almost gets like a religious matter. Like, like the climate change conversation gets a little bit religious, where when you ask them why, they don't have answers. It's just the way it should be. And then when you bring things up, they don't want to listen. And, again, 1988 was a big year for me, but I remember Mr. Manuel, the first day of biology class, he says, everything you read, everything you hear, everything someone says to you, question. Look at COVID times. We're not allowed to question a thing. Like, it was crazy. And I remember him saying that because until then in my young life, I had gone to church, grew up in the church, so the Bible was law. Textbooks were the truth. You went to the library to get the dictionary and get the encyclopedias. Those were the truth. I never questioned those things. This was just facts, and I loved absorbing facts and learning. And then here I sit in this class going, everything that you think is true might not be. And it was like, whoa. I remember sitting in the class. I remember him wearing his white lab coat, and it just blew me away. So that morning I've got chemistry class telling me that there's a good and bad to everything. And then the next day is question everything. And I've done that ever since. And when you have a conversation on any subject, if someone can't question what they believe, it's then a belief. It's not a fact. The number one thing to change, though, the hardest thing to change with somebody is belief, because there's no logic. You believe it because you do. It's about faith. This is the way it is. I know it the way it is in my heart, right? And that's hard to change. But when you're talking about science and different things, science is always learning new things. So we have to be open to a conversation. And you might be wrong, and you might be right. You might be in the middle, but you got to learn to have that conversation, because if you don't, how do you learn and how do we progress, instead of just picking sides and going, this is what my side believes and this is what my side believes. Well, you believe it. That doesn't mean it's a fact. It's just a belief. So we kind of, the EV part of that is it's got part of that by 2035 that you can't buy a new vehicle that's got a combustion engine. Well, I just bought a 2007 truck, and I think I'm going to run that until it just dies, and that's the way I'll do it. When I have the option, I'll have both. Until I have an option, I'm going to be burning all the fossil fuels I friggin' can.
Well, then the argument comes that if we are becoming too much of a social justice warrior for our area, like Canada produces, 1% of the world's emissions? And then if you were worried about getting lithium batteries, like, okay, we can have lithium mines in other countries because we don't see that. We don't need to touch it, but we can't have a pipeline in our own country, which would contribute to jobs and our own sustainability here in Canada. It makes it difficult to be on the EV side of it, to be on that side, because I think that the climate change argument is many different things, but when it comes down to the statistics and the science of that, and what we're trying to do in the policy and regulations that we're making, to me, it just doesn't make sense because of the lack of pollution that Canada does compared to other countries. And then you're shipping in lithium or you're shipping in components from other countries and you're not worrying about it. Whereas I would rather see us focus on getting Canada more sovereign, getting Canada able to produce its own food, to produce its own fuel, because then on the world stage, we would have a much better standing. We're one of the largest countries in the world. We have a relatively small population, but we have such incredible ability and such great forestry, and we have fuels, we have mining. I talked about this with Matt a couple weeks ago. Like, it's so easy for us to be able to produce and do many more things, but I think that we're being regulated and legislated into pigeonholed.
Well, part of it is not in my backyard syndrome, right? Like, we all like to eat meat, but we don't like to think about what that animal went through for it to be there. We like to drive our cars, but we don't realize all the mining that has to take place to destroy nature for you to have that car.
Even to steal.
Right? Energy needs to be produced. Like, we are consumers. Like, we are a parasite on the planet, right? But that's the way it is. And when you greenify it or not greenify it, at the end of the day, we're still manufacturing stuff that's taking energy, that's destroying nature and habitat. And I don't know the answer to it. It's very complex.
At the end of the day, I would rather see made in Canada or produced in Canada than made in China.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Because there's so much, or even made in the U.S. Like, you could have your problems with Trump and what's going on in the U.S. right now, but they're our neighbors and they're relatively similar culturally or sociopolitically to us. But I'd rather see it come from the U.S. or Canada than to have stuff shipped from China, because I know that their communist state is not as forgiving on their people. But they've got manufacturing down.
Well, we get addicted to cheap stuff. You look at, Walmart way back when, and I could have this totally wrong, but we don't have a Jamie to look up the stats, but a good margin when Walmart started was an 18% on something. And then they opened their first factory up in China and realized they can make an 80% margin on a lot of the goods. So we get addicted to the profit. We also get, us as consumers get addicted to price, right? So if we can make it cheaper, I mean, you think of how much it costs to manufacture things. I mean, you think Quebec was a huge textile capital. I mean, there was lots of stuff made, shirts and all that kind of stuff, right? But everything now is made overseas because it's so cheap. So, Dad only said when the manufacturing leaves, that's where your wealth leaves, right? Because if you're manufacturing here, you have good jobs and the profits stay in your economy. But the problem is can we afford that, right? So that's the crazy balance too. So again, I don't know the answer, but that's the problem, where we want to pay the least amount for things at the end of the day, right?
So you not only have been an ethical hacker, obsessed with tech, a serial entrepreneur, you have been an adventurer most of your life as well. If you're watching the video, we've got a couple of Trek It memorabilia that I've been a part of. Let's take a quick break and we'll talk about some of your adventures around the world here after we come back. If you are enjoying this episode, I want you to subscribe to our Patreon. You can do it for free, or if you want to support us, because Lord knows that Facebook and YouTube are not paying me like anything to do these. And I would like to keep doing them. I'd love to hire a producer that can film this stuff so that we can do more of them and talk to more people that you want to. So if you go to patreon.com/homegrown show, you can join as a free or a paid member so you can have your say on guests who are coming on. You can ask questions that I can ask during the show, and you can help us out to be able to ask your questions, to be able to teach you more and cover topics of things that you want to see heard. Because I know you've got questions and the media is only doing what they want to do. I want to do what you want to do. I want to talk about things that you actually care about and talk to people that you actually care about in your community, in your province. We can make a difference. Go to patreon.com/homegrown show where you can learn more, become a member, chat with me. It's much easier over there than just comment sections, but leave a comment too, like and subscribe and all that stuff. That helps. Back to the show. So we first met I was working at Dave Sports. I was working at a power sports dealer, and they were sponsoring a TV show. And that TV show was your TV show, and Matt told me that I make better content than you and thought that I could be an improvement on your team. That was 2019. And then from there, we hit it off. We made a couple of seasons, a couple of different shows together, but you were adventuring with Trek It, and I think without the Trek It brand for a few years before you actually, before we met. So what was your first adventure, your world travels that brought you sort of the excitement that brings you back to it time and time again?
Well, we started Trek It in 2012. That was our first season on Bell TV1. A friend of mine was starting to curate the content for a new channel that Bell was putting out, being funded by the CRTC sort of community funds. And I had been pitching them this idea for a Trek It app, right, where you could go on a hike or whatever, and it would, record your GPS, take your pictures, put it all together in a map, and you could put it on a website. And I've always wanted to do that. I just never had the time or the energy to sort of complete it. But I was pitching them that, and they said, "Well, we're starting a new channel. Why don't you go do that, but film it and put it on our channel?" And I was like, I don't even own a video camera. Like, I hadn't done video work since probably 1993, right? I used to do a little bit of informational videos for the school district. We had an Amiga with a video toaster, and we'd edit them and had a lot of fun that way. But I hadn't done any video work. I mean, I was an avid photographer, but photography and videography are very different. And you can tell sometimes when people start as a videographer that they've been a photographer first, because they take their shots are too short. They don't do a lot of pans. It's a very, static. So it's a short. And so we got a contract. They gave me a little bit of money. And the first adventure was twofold. One is we did some interesting things around New Brunswick. So we did the waterfalls of New Brunswick, and we went to Walton Gorge and to show some of the beauty of New Brunswick. But that first season, I headed straight to Scotland. So I was turning 40 that year, and 9 generations ago, that my ancestors came over when the father was 40 with their 11 kids. So I decided to film a little trek from the graveyard where they're buried in Scotch Ridge, which is outside St. Stephen, back to the Highlands of Scotland where my ancestors came from. So me and my brother and my wife Christy and his wife Monica, and way too much camera gear, the way we went, which was really neat. We filmed at Edinburgh Castle. We filmed at the Isle of Skye. Kind of got a real flavor of traveling but capturing the adventure. Like, there's one thing to take some photos and eat at interesting places and that type of thing, but it was to get off the beaten path and look at it from a story perspective, not just a photograph in a book, but how do you tell the story and make it interesting. So that was super fun. I actually went back and met one of the McDonald's, that authentic swordsmith. We went to a shop where he still tries to make swords like they did way back when, and ate haggis and all that kind of stuff. So that was really neat. So we did that. We did a second season mainly around New Brunswick. I outsourced a lot of that because I didn't have time, and did some little clips, then decided, like, why not go to Iceland? I'd only played Risk, and Iceland was only sort of an interesting little island, and I knew nothing about it. So I took 6 months to create a plan, and we took a crew, and that was super fun. I mean, we spent more time on a dirt road than we did on the asphalt. We had a truck, a Land Rover we called Happy because we were happy when we drove it. And the way we went, and then that was the bug. We did Iceland, we did Norway, and then we took a few years off. Bell, Ontario was absorbing Bell Alliant. Allegiances were changing, and so had a couple of years off, and then I bought a new ATV. And I'm like, there's this kind of a story here. What if we take a bunch of computer nerds? Most of them never owned an ATV in their life. And everybody gets an ATV, and we go out and start figuring out this ATV thing. And man, was it fun. We had a guy that just became a new Canadian. He was from Egypt. He had driven ATVs in the sand, so he knew about throttle was either on or off. So driving in the woods was a little different than the sand. We had Paul, who was a tank driver, so he got himself a big brute force, and he really liked that. And Christian and Rodney, everybody got bikes, and the way we went probably to some places that were too technical for our skill level, but made good TV. And that was really interesting. We got to meet the Quad MB folks. They were super supportive. We got to meet a lot of people in the ATV communities, like, Long Lake Adventures, Adair's, those type of places that are sort of hubs for this kind of activity. And it was like, wow, there's this whole subculture in New Brunswick. You got to think there's 32,000 registrations for ATVs sold just in New Brunswick. You got to think of the percentage of population or percentage of households that have an ATV. And the trails are, they range from, dusty dirt roads to, slimy, muddy roads to rocky roads. But, depending on your type of adventure, if you just want to go in your side-by-side and kind of bomb around the woods, or if you want to do some hill climbing with some rocks, it's out there. And then we met you, and because we wanted to do some more videography, because we wanted to be in it. It was hard to be in it and film it. And that was really tough, because we'd set the camera up down the road, we hit the on button, we go back, we drive by the camera.
Takes twice as long.
Oh yeah, and then you're doing interviews, or you're doing it because a lot of it is about having the people. It's not about one person being interviewed. It's about capturing the moment. And when you're having a moment, the camera's not on because you're having a moment. So if you have somebody that has a video camera that's always filming, when things get kind of goofy or stressful, you capture that essence where, before it's a little static. So we did that for a couple of years. I mean, we did the first year was super fun. The second year we kind of did under that whole COVID blanket, so we just did it mainly in the backyard and bit. And so the third season came around, and I was like, we got to do something bigger, like something stupid. You know, we're getting a little older. What can we do now that maybe in 5 or 10 years we don't want to do? So I said, why don't we do the circumference of the province? Like everybody's done, like inside the province, there's lots of trails. But what do we do the perimeter? Like, is there a loop around the province? Because I get really obsessed with the West Virginia trails because they have 8 towns that they connect. And they sort of had the same problem we do. Or their number one export was their children. So their children, you know, grow up, move away. And then all these roads were left from mining and forestry. So what do we do with them? Well, they got together 20 some years ago and they connected 8 towns. I think now they've got to 20 towns connected. But every one of those towns, you can drive into the town, you know, and fill up with gas, stay at the bed and breakfast. They even have insurance. You can go there and pay for it. And if you break down on the trail, somebody will show up and change your belt or whatever. But they set it up, you know, that you're not a criminal. You know, there's still towns in New Brunswick, which just floors me, you know, that you can't drive into a little town and get gas or you're going to get a ticket from an RCMP officer. Like, that's insane.
Why is that? Is that the legislation is different?
Yeah, it's to do that. Like here you have to get highway usage permits, right? So the town has to agree to it. And a lot of small towns have, like Sussex, they have a route, right? It's not like you drive all over town, right? But people drive bicycles and motorcycles and electric bikes and all that. Why not an ATV? And the tires on an ATV aren't built to be on the road. So you're ruining the tires. So you don't want to be on asphalt very long anyway, right? But you do want to come in with services. And if you want to go get gas, well, you got to worry about a ticket. Because if you're worried about it, what do? You drive really fast, you look around, you drive really fast to get out. Not that I've ever done that. Many times. But they had embraced it. So I really liked that. So we wanted to do this to inspire both the local citizen, government, and Quad MB. How can we make a loop so people will go, I want to come to New Brunswick. It's like Newfoundland. You go to Newfoundland, you can drive your ATV onto the ferry, and you can drive straight across Newfoundland. And there's all these little towns that you can drive in, and it's a lovely experience. And people do it by the boatload, right? Why can't we have that here? Well, if you're going to have it here, people need to feel safe. They need to have, a mature trail system. You got to be able to drive into town, take a shower, those type of things, right? And we're getting there. Like it's like Quad MB Synth is in the government of leaps and bounds, and especially the local municipalities, because that's where it comes from. I don't want to drive my ATV downtown Fredericton, right? But if I'm Canterbury, like, give me a break, right? So anyway, we worked on this loop. So we started in St. Stephen and we drove, up to Benton, Woodstock. Yeah. We were cold, wet, and tired that day. We went all the way up to, we went to Plaster Rock. We went to Edmundston, stayed there. We actually slept where the Canada, Maine, New Brunswick border PEG is. So one guy slept in Maine, one guy slept in Quebec, one guy slept in New Brunswick. And he had a moose visit us. That was kind of crazy. We had a police escort through Bathurst because we couldn't drive through Bathurst yet, but they arranged for a police escort, which was super fun. All the way down, the other side to Dieppe. We were kind of stuck in Dieppe. I was kidding with the government folks that were helping sponsor the show that we were just going to wait till 2 a.m. and drive through, and they didn't see the humor in that. But, Atlantic Pacific Trucking, a friend of Jens and a real good guy, he decided that he'd pick us up and transport. So there we were. They picked us up. They drove us to Salisbury. We continued all the way to St. John, which again, we met him to drive us over the Harbour Station Bridge. And 15 days later and 2,300 kilometers later, we arrived back in St. Stephen. Now, it was a challenge. I mean, my bike broke down 3 kilometers in. This is after the dealer had looked at all the bikes, and I was ripping angry. And I'm like, we're not even 4 kilometers out. And how are we going to...
You downplay that, but you were so mad, you were ready to set your bike on fire. That was, before we got your bike started, you were ready to just pour gasoline on it and just walk away. Because we were at, where were we? We were at Balancing Rock, and your bike, we came back to them, and then you wanted to start your bike, and it just went...
Yeah, but that was the second breakdown. The first breakdown was right outside of Red Rooster, right? And remember, Christy had to she had to go back to Fredericton, get my
I
scrambler.
didn't see that one.
Right. So they had to take it, right, because we met you. So Christy had to bring my backup bike. I drove that to Woodstock, and Christy had delivered the Sportsman to Dave Sports, and they thought they had fixed it there. And so she took the scrambler back, and then we got to Balancing Rock, and I got on it again, and it was nothing. And I was so angry. Like, that's probably one of my top 10 anger moments. Like, how are we going to do this? Like, we can't rely on this stuff. And then
while you were on a 2-week trip around the province, that you were already stressed about the trip itself and making it work to get 5 guys around the province.
Yeah, and get enough footage that we could get 6 episodes, right? Like, when you're driving, you're not filming, and you can't just film driving because it's boring, right? So, one guy I remember on social media, he's like, the breakdowns, this was all staged. I'm like, no, my anger level was nothing was staged. Like, I was mad that day. And luckily, Christian has the patience of Job. He really does. And he was like, take it easy, and takes the bike apart, and it's either air, fuel, or spark, right? So we did the evaluation, and we opened the side of it up, and we found the spark plug wire was toast, and it was just kind of sitting there, and they all blamed it on the way I shift the Polaris. Like, I like to go from park to drive and back, and I guess I do it too hard, and just the way it sort of vibrates the spark plug wire, it kind of wore it out. So we actually zip tied it into it, and that ran great the rest of the time. And we were having a great time until we got to Moose Jaw, right? Moose Lodge. And on the radio, because we had these headsets, so we could all hear each other, right? So we'd have comedy hour at 5 o'clock, and Paul would tell jokes, and we'd laugh until we peed our pants.
Or Paul had to poop in the bushes.
And Paul had to poop in the bushes. But Ben comes on the comms, and he's like, yeah, the support vehicle. So everyone was on an ATV. So we weren't on side-by-sides. This was on ATVs. But Ben was in the side-by-side because he had all the support equipment. He had the barbecue. He had all the filming equipment, all that kind of stuff, tools. And the front tire, one was going this way and one was going that way. And, Matt had lent us this side-by-side, and he was really good, to lend us the side-by-side, because then, there was no stock. We thought we'd get a new demo or whatever, and we got this really abused Honda Pioneer that the frame just broke in. The frame just broke. There's no coverage. There's nothing. So we're at the Moose Lodge.
I think it's important to note that just prior to that, we had gone the wrong way for about 5 kilometers down a farmer's field, and then I had to back out with the Pioneer because we were on a cliff, and you got stuck in the woods by the cows.
Yeah. We took the wrong turn, and we ended up
in tractor ruts that I was stuck on like a 45-degree hill.
Yeah, but what was worse is the way that grew up, we didn't realize it was a cliff. It just looked like it was bushes, and we just about went over. I forgot about that. That was insane, and you did have to back
We opened
up
up the cow pasture. We went
yes,
out. We closed the fence.
I remember that. That was slightly insane. It was hot. But still, you now have a wheel like this. So we crawl under it, and we can see where someone previously had broke the frame and done a not so great weld job on it, and it had let go. So we were like, what do we do? What do we do? So the guy up there was pretty French. Christian speaks French, thankfully. They got talking. He had a diesel generator, which he could turn on, and he actually had a welder, which he didn't know how to run. But Ben, in a previous life, had gone to a welding course. So he was our resident expert for welding. So we limped this thing because we ratchet strapped it together, and we limped this thing into this guy's barn. He was so good about it. And we actually stayed there the night at the lodges, which was awesome. But Ben proceeded to weld this thing, and he ruined a few shirts. We jacked it up. We put boards under it. It probably wasn't the safest approach, but we welded this thing. So here we are in the middle of nowhere on a diesel generator welding this bike together. Like, people are like, they staged this. Like, there's no way we staged it.
I wish we had staged
it. I'm not that smart. You know what I mean? You don't write this stuff. You just go and life happens. So, and we had a great meal there. Like, we were at, we had lots of barbecue stuff. We got showers. Like, it was kind of nice to get the dust off us and everything.
He opened up the gas for us, which he doesn't normally do in the summertime.
That's right. Yeah, because we didn't have much left. And we convinced Paul, was it Paul, that we had not filled up our jerry cans. So Paul thought we were out of gas, and we didn't tell him that gas was there. So Paul was convinced that half the day tomorrow we'd run out of fuel and be stranded, and what we were going to do about it. So we were stressing him out on purpose, and then we showed him the gas tank and all that. He also fixed the fuel filter, and his brute force was full.
While I was welding the...
Right.
Yeah.
So you were welding that. He was putting in a new fuel filter, which we knew that may have that, so we had a few extras with us. And then we continued on the next day, and we were going to Bathurst, and the frame broke again. And we were in the middle of the woods. And we were probably 25, 30 kilometers from a road. And so, Christian and Rodney ratchet strapped that bike together to hold it together. We got it out to the road. What was nice, it was Jacques from Quad MB had actually contacted some of the ATV dealerships to say, hey, if these guys need help along the way, you guys need help for support. So we called one of those dealers, and the guy that was supposed to be there was on vacation, so the guy didn't know anything about it, but Christian convinced him, like, hey, what was going on, and they showed up with a truck, and we left. We were on our way to Bathurst because we were staying at the Atlantic Coast, which had always been a great ATV supporter. And we were off to there, and we left Ben on the side of the road on this very hot day with his ATV, hope would come find him. Which they did, and they welded it up, and it worked for the rest of the trip, except the last day we were burning more oil and gas in that Pioneer. Like, if you watch the show, like, we were putting a little bit of gas and a lot of oil. Like, and then there was people with us driving in for the last day that had oil that we were putting in to make it.
We were begging for oil because the last 10 kilometers, we kept having to beg people to give us oil. We're like, I don't care if it's Honda oil anymore, just anything. Yeah. 5W30, just give it to me, we'll pour it in.
WD-40 would probably would have used like anything. Like, that was nuts. But we did it. Like, we actually, 15 days later, we, on time, we crossed into the Red Rooster again, and there was a lot of people there. We had built a little bit of a social media following when we started. Because when we left, it was like my mother and brother waving goodbye and the way we went. And when we came back, there's probably 100 or so bikes waiting to come in with us. We were doing live streams on the way. And we had a police escort into town and had a little bit of a festivity there. And that was super fun. Like, that was so much fun. We met someone like Bert up north who navigated us in, Ob gave us a nice tour down in the southern part. Like, there's just people you meet, Jacques helped arrange the police escort in Bathurst. You meet these people that care about the sport, and you meet a lot of them along the way, and they really care. And it's those volunteers that put their life into it, and people whine, oh, this trail is muddy and this trail's got a hole, and whine, complain. But, these volunteers, they suck all that up for the love of it. And I mean, I truly appreciate it. Like, I didn't realize the work that's gone into the ATV infrastructure. And so we did that loop. You see the bridges, you see the trails, you see the signage, and you meet the people that actually care. It's really heartwarming. I mean, I loved it. I loved every minute of doing that. And then after that season, we did a season 4, sort of hero towns, and then we ended it off with a great season, Prince Edward Island. Peter and the crew over there invited us over, and we spent fall there. We spent a little bit of summer. We spent a wicked winter couple of days, which was super eye-opening. And I always thought PEI be boring. Like, I don't want to go 18 PEI. Like, it's boring. And then I got over there and went, whoa. Like, going through the farmers' fields were very interesting. Then they have a lot of wood lots as well, and great clubhouses and great clubs. It was just... There, I haven't seen a positive community like that in a long time in PEI, but the riding along the cliff of the ocean with your ATV when the sun's setting, like, that's $1 million. Like, that day that we drove down that road and we drove along the cliff and the sun was setting with the red dirt, like, that's burnt into my brain. Like, I just loved every moment of that. And the way Ben captured that with the drone, with the sun, it really did capture, because there was like a red hue from the sun. It just captured what I felt, and that's what was, it was really fun filming with you, because I'll tell you what I'm kind of looking for, and you capture that. And because a lot of times when you're doing TV production, you have an emotion that you're hooking to the story, but you have to capture that emotion and play through it. So when you do it through the video, when you do it through your narration, the others through music. But if you don't have that core video captured, it's hard to do that. And with PEI, Ben and I, we were in sync, and I think some of the best work we've ever done, cinematically, was done there. And I was really proud of what we produced.
Yeah, that came out to 6 episodes, or a 2-hour film that we premiered in PEI.
Mm-hmm. That was super fun. Yeah, they rented the theater there, and the clubs came out and watched that. That was super cool.
It really speaks to the subculture, both in New Brunswick and PEI. I think it's more visible in PEI, that they're more accepted, the towns are more into it, whereas in New Brunswick it is that subculture of people that a lot of people still see. People who drive wheelers, I think you see the teens and the people who steal wheelers, and that sort of is your idea of people who go around on ATVs. But the reality is there's an entire subculture of people who've retired, bought an ATV, and those are the ones who maintain the trails in large part.
Yeah, and you got to think, some of the new wheelers, you buy a new side-by-side, is $40,000. A top-end Polaris with a camping kit is $72,000. These aren't the Yahoos. This isn't a 3-wheeler that you bought with, blueberry raking money, and you're going out terrorizing the neighbors. Like, there's a little bit of that, but there'll be that, and people do donuts in cars, right? Everybody uses mechanical things for the wrong reason, but the majority of people that, have a good income, are retired, they buy very expensive machines, they are not Yahoos. And it's the whole history of where it started. Snowmobiling comes out of the tourist department. So it was a tourism product, and had the funding of that. Where ATVs was public safety, because they were annoying, so they need to be regulated and controlled, right? So it's taken a lot of time to see this as a tourist asset, not something that needs to be regulated, like we talked about before. You get over regulation and all that, because these people are buying them for farm equipment, and kids were taking them out terrorizing the neighbors and all that kind of stuff. So, we got to wrap our arms around this and, make sure we regulate the death out of it. So they've always been looked at, we need to control them, but snowmobiles are tourism, so that's awesome. And that's changed, and it's changed a lot lately, which is really good. It's really good to see.
What would you like to see with regards to the ATV community in New Brunswick? Like a bigger push for tourism, or a bigger community?
I mean, what they really need, I think, is some signature trails, which they've been working on, and then how to publicize those internationally. You think of West Virginia and those trails, it's the mecca for the United States ATVer to go to that trail. You can spend a week, every day you're in a different town. You kind of do a circle. You can leave your truck here. You can rent a side-by-side there.
So is there a disconnect then between the politicians, who largely, like we mentioned, live in cities, and the people who actually drive ATVs, or the clubs that promote it? Because that's something that, we've talked at length about, that the province promotes Fundy and some awesome things that we have in the province. But with regards to tourism stuff, or like the redneck things that would largely bring money here, that's something that the province doesn't really push. Perceivably.
Yeah, and when we tried it when we did the loop, they financially supported us, but we also offered we would give them clips and do different things, and they never took us up on that. On the tourism site, why isn't there some videos? And it doesn't have to be us, but of positive experiences. But you kind of need to package it up. So somebody coming from Ontario, or Southern United States, or even England, like, I had a guy over here from England, and we went ATVing, and it blew him away, because over there it's all private property. You couldn't just go ATVing. Like, they don't have the crowned land that's accessible like we do. You got to think we have that asset. We got all this crowned land that we can ATV on, and then there's so many private wood owners, like the Irvings, and smaller wood owners. They allow ATV trails through it. So we have this network of trails that most places don't, right? And they're very organized. The next thing really is the marketing part, because that's hard to do, right? Is how do you capture some of these routes and put them out there so people can come, but they know, like you look at Newfoundland, it was a father and son built that website, and it showed the world how to get across Newfoundland. And so you knew where to stay, where to get gas, how to get your thing fixed, all that. Just a little more like it's that sort of next level up. When you talk to Peter and PEI, like when we did the video series, because it's on Wild TV, it's seen across Canada and some other jurisdictions. He's like, are we ready? Like, if we get the people, are we ready? So, I think part of it is Quad MB wanting to get ready. I think they're getting there for sure. And then what is the product? Everybody knows about the snowmobiling, but it's been years and years and years of reinforcement from tourism. When do we see that? When do we break that Yahoo image where it is something families do? I mean, I know a lot of young families that buy 4-seaters and they put the 2 kids in the back and mom and dad are in the front, and instead of having a cottage, they're out on the wheeler, and that's pretty cool.
And I think there's so much opportunity around the province too, because like you mentioned, we've been to some beautiful places throughout the province, but there is that disconnect. There's a lot of places that they have their trails, their system of trails, where you've got the club trails and all the good old boys know where they are, but either there's not signage or they just don't connect, which is something we did run into going around the province, is we couldn't find, you had a really hard time finding connections, and even along the way we ran into issues where the trail is just gone, been decimated by forestry.
Yeah, I mean, creating that loop around the province is tough, and a lot of people wanted the GPS. And I never gave it out because, I'm not sure how legal some of it was. I mean, most of it, we started with Quad MB maps. They've got a great app for all the authorized trails. And then there's a lot of people that contribute to Google Maps of unauthorized trails, which is totally legit to drive on. But once in a while, we'd come and the trail would be closed. We were up in northern New Brunswick, and it was even on the Quad MB trail. It's green, and the landowner decided that they didn't want people anymore, and we had to run pavement for 5 or 6 kilometers to get to the next part of the trail. Which technically is illegal. And so I wasn't going to give people like, here's the map to go follow, and then like, well, we were just following this guy's map. Well, there was some of that, and we get to some other parts, of old growth forest, which was being, totally clear cut, which was really disheartening. If it's a mature forest, I mean, is there a way to sort of take some of the mature trees, but still leave the ambiance of the forest, right? But this was just mud. Like, every tree was gone. It was dirt. The big machines had tore up the ground. They call it industrial logging or whatever. But it was sad to see, some of these old, the big canopies of the big old trees. And yes, it's that whole balance between industry and, employing people versus, preserving enough of the land for everyone to enjoy. That was kind of hard. It was pretty sad to see. It wasn't, I remember my grandfather logging, he had just a little 100 acres, but he'd go back and cut the mature trees. And, in a year or two, you didn't even know where they were cut. Because there's other trees growing around, and you did that selective cutting. Or they used a pickup. A lot of these ATV trails are old wood roads, but they use small vehicles. Right now, it's a dirt road that you can put 2 transports by. So, when they're done logging, yes, that road's left, but for ATVing, I mean, boring, dirty log roads aren't, they're not entertaining. It's the old ones that were cut years ago that you go through. So how do we preserve that? Or if we're going to do the trails here, this is all going to be clear cut for financial reasons. Can you leave a little bit of buffer? So at least when you're driving, you still have that. Right. And if we're going to make it a tourist product, you don't want people come from all over the world driving through clear cuts. Like it's not good. So again, I don't know the answer, but there just needs to be a balance. It's, when everybody works together, so everybody's interest is put in the pot and we do what's for the greater good instead of one person's pocket, it's better for everybody. But, us as humans, we have a hard time doing that.
Yeah, I think it's hard to be able to find that answer because you're right. You don't really want to compete with industry, but you do want to be able to bring in that tourism and have that asset because that's something that, New Brunswick was the pitcher province. And somehow we've become the drive-through province. And a lot of people, especially in Atlantic Canada, know that people coming from Ontario and Quebec are driving through to go to Piggy's Cove. They're driving through to go to PEI. They're driving through to get to Newfoundland. Whereas New Brunswick itself, I mean, I have lived here the majority of my life, is beautiful. And yes, we have the Fundy Cliffs, and we've got Kujbaquack, and we've got some amazing places around the province, around the cliffs and whatnot. But there's some internal things that we saw on our trip around the province that many people, even New Brunswickers, or even growing to Graham and Ann, like some really special places that people, even New Brunswickers, have never been to. The number of New Brunswickers that have never been to Graham and Ann and experienced the island is wild to me.
I'm glad you brought that up, because when we were doing the loop, the Graham and Ann Club reached out and said, hey, can you make Graham and Ann part of the loop? And it just wasn't in the plan, so we couldn't. But we went back the next year, and it was sort of like PEI, like, what is their ATV in Graham and Ann? And it was like, whoa. Like, their club is, super. We had a tour of the internals of Graham and Ann, and then the lookout sites on the cliffs, in Dark Harbor, and it was like,
those
wow.
drone shots don't even do it justice.
No.
Like, it's beautiful in the drone shots, but seeing it in person is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, and the hospitality of the Islanders just blew us away. Like it was just epic. Like, every piece of it was epic, and it was a highlight, like, of my ATVing in New Brunswick, time. Like, Graham and Ann was a moment in time that was just incredible. I mean, I love that. And it's so unique. I mean, you get off the ferry, you take your bikes to a nice lodge, you get on the trail, you're driving through some, they try to keep their trails really skinny. So they're, you're going through the trees, and then you come out to this vista on the ocean. And then, to end it off.
Which is fine when you're driving an ATV and not a two-seater bus.
That was hilarious. You did get stuck.
Because when you are going on trails that are designed for ATVs and you're bringing through the support vehicle that we got donated to us, I end up sideways full of heavy camera equipment.
Yeah, it was entertaining. I like to watch you sweat a little bit. That was kind of fun. Yeah, but that was a cool trip. But yeah, unfortunately, I haven't, since PEI, I've probably been on the ATV 4 or 5 times. Just the other work's been too busy. But I'm hoping to get back at it, because I'd still love it every time I get on the bike.
You're on a new venture now. You mentioned River a little bit in the beginning. Dive into both sides of it, the live streaming part of it, and how you got into that, and then also the other side, which is the River chat portion.
So it goes back to the 2012 days when we started Trek It as a show. Also a friend of mine, Chubba Demo, because he worked for Bell, and he wanted to continue doing live stream of university sports, and we would set that to the Bell set-top box, and on the web, so UMB or St. Thomas or all the universities in Nova Scotia. We had Bishop's University as well, so that way people could watch their kids. Maybe they can't travel, or they're not close, or grandma from Alberta can watch or whatever. So we did a lot of streaming with a lot of schools. We actually broadcast the Canada Games one year through the system, so we built that system from the ground up. And then when that Ontario shift happened, when Bell Canada took over Bell Alliant, that faded. And so Chubb always wanted to do pay-per-view. And I was like, I don't want to build it. I don't sort of see everything on the web's free. So he left Bell, and he did a lot of things pay-per-view with this other company in Alberta. And it went bankrupt last year. So he had all these people that needed to stream, and he got relationships with some people out in Alberta that were also streaming on the platform. And he just calls me up out of the blue and goes, hey, you built this once. Can you guys build it again? And I'm like, well, I'm really busy with Cognitive Spark. I'd like to do some more Trek It videos, trying to figure out the finances, because it's still got to make sense. If you're spending time on it, it's got to have some reward to it. So kind of did the numbers up and different things. And I didn't want to leave Chubb in a lurch, because, he was in my wedding, for God's sakes, right? Like, I've known him a long time, and I hate to see people go, okay, your business just got shut off. And the alternatives are there for live streaming, but what we'd really optimize is for university sports and for sports teams. So it's a really sort of focused thing. So I talked to my son, Alex, and said, hey, do you want to make a couple of bucks and, blow your summer? So we spent July and August just writing code, like writing code, because in September the schools are coming online, right? And Chubb and Caleb, the guy out in Alberta, had done a good job bringing in most of the customers to say, look, these guys have gone bankrupt. We don't even have a system yet, but we're going to build one and you guys will be okay, and get them to believe that. And I was kind of skeptical because I'm like, who's going to pay to watch university sports? Like, who's going to, pay $10 a game or whatever, right? So, and it was trying to do the math on it, because paying on usage wasn't that good. Could we do a service fee on the credit card? Maybe that would do it. So we kind of figured out the model, but we stopped life. And in September, we had the streaming platform running. A lot of it is what I'd learned before, but none of the original code, because things have changed so much. Like the last time I built it on Microsoft Azure, they didn't even have the services to do live streaming, so I had to learn AWS from scratch how to do that, right? So it's like, whoa. But we got that running, and it was profitable, but it also let me show, can I work with my son as a developer? I mean, in high school, he hated computers and thought programming is dumb. He goes to university, takes a Python course, and switches from engineering to computer engineering because he's like, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my life, right? So sometimes it's hard to work with your kids, right? Because, dad's the authoritative guy that knows everything and you're just a stupid kid and you do what you're told, where I kind of gave him his freedom to do what he thought he could do a good job at. So really collectively, we built this system, and it's been running, and it's actually our second season starts in September. We're building a second version of it right now. So that kind of was really fun, and showed that we could work together. My wife does the books and the financials, does all the invoicing, so it was like really neat, and it taught the kids about branding. Steven Sinofsky from Microsoft, he's the guy that shipped Windows 8. He was there for a long time, and he always said shipping is hard. And ideas are easy. Execution's hard, but actually getting your product in the hands of customers is really, really hard. Like all those things you don't even think about. You got brand, you got website, you got graphics, identity, you got logos. Does it scale? Do people understand what you just said? Because you know it really well because you built it, but when you explain it to somebody, do you have a clue, right? So it was teaching them, like just like I learned the soft skills at the school board, is sort of teaching them those soft skills as well. So that was really fun. September, October, November, December, the system started running. It was crazy because we were building the airplane as we're flying it. Because, the other company had run for 10 years. How do you duplicate all the features? So a lot of things that they expected that weren't there, because to them is that should be there. Well, I didn't know, and they didn't realize they missed it. And because, it's like, okay, we're going to build this. Okay, so I built that. Yeah, but it doesn't have this. Yeah, but we said we're going to build that. So, so we built a lot of those on the fly as well. So, the big games are Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which is your weekend. But you're working during the week to publish a new version on Thursday. But if you broke something, now it's not streaming, people are screaming. But they wanted that feature. But every time you post a new feature, you're at a risk of stability, right? So every weekend, I'm kind of like on call for something to blow up, right? So those 4 months were pretty scary, right? It was like building the airplane as you flew it.
Did you have customers that would just like email you or call you with like, hey, I need this like now? This is...
No, I refused to do that. But we would learn what they needed, and I would learn things that I needed to build that would stop them from asking me for certain things. Like, hey, I need this reconfigured, or do this, do that. So I'd build tools to allow them to manage things better. Caleb and Chubb are really good about it, because they absorbed a lot of the sort of the pressure from the direct customer, right? And then they would filter that to me, right? So I knew if Chubb or Caleb contacted me, like, okay, we got something we need to deal with, because they've troubleshooted it and all that kind of stuff. So that was super stressful, super crazy. Learned a lot. Alex stepped up. It was a great experience, and now it's running really well, and I'm quite proud of it actually. And I'm kind of glad that Chubb and Caleb had the faith to shift their customers over, right? So for the last probably 2 years, I've always wanted to build a privacy chat application, from my security days. Signal's out there, you got end-to-end encryption on Facebook and all that, but sometimes building it yourself is just the fun of building it yourself. And so we started down that route, kind of tinkering, and it's evolved into the point where why don't we do it so people can buy their own private phone numbers? For a lot of reasons. So, you're selling something on Facebook Marketplace, or you're in the dating scene, or maybe you have a phone number that you just gives a salesman, so, you can ignore them. But there's a lot of times you don't want to give out your real phone number.
Or swap SIMs or...
Yeah, exactly. Like you have multiple phones for multiple numbers. So maybe, you're a car salesman during the day. Well, maybe you don't want to give them your personal number, right? But you don't want to have two phones, right? A lot of people have a work phone, they have a home phone, and then, some people have those multiple SIMs in their iPhone that you got two numbers, but now you got a whole SIM and all that stuff, so you got to live with it. So we were like, okay, why don't we build this app that people can buy their own number? But if you have a River number and I have a River number, if we text each other, it's actually encrypted end to end. So in the background, I get my secure encryption app that I wanted, so I can communicate with my circle of trust. But also the way to make revenue for it is to sell those numbers so people can have that privacy of their own number. So we'll be launching that in about 2 weeks. So you can visit it right now, www.riverchat.com. or www.river.chat. And you can check it out. It should be downloadable really soon. And I'm hoping that it makes enough money to actually put back into the Trek It Studios, or we may even rebrand it as River Studios, and start making content again. I really miss getting the camera, getting outdoors, telling some stories. And, it takes a lot of time to get sponsorship. It's a lot of networking, a lot of relationships. So, if this could be a revenue stream that helps support that, that would be pretty cool. So sort of my, sub reason to do this is that, plus, working with my kids has been pretty good. So we got both Nathan and Jake, or both Alex is a developer and Nathan on the business side, and Christy are all working on the project. So it's been fun.
I feel like the biggest concern for people who use an encrypted or a service like yours, like River or like Signal, is not necessarily encryption. It's the people behind it. So the weakness becomes the people behind it, right? Because anything can be as encrypted and uncrackable, but if there's a backdoor into it, and just as soon as you get any pressure, which I know people had been on Apple for their iMessages, and like, okay, as soon as the cops come asking, it's just like, okay, here you go. Is that something that you are worried about with River?
Well, it's always a worry. I mean, we actually have a link on our website that shows you anytime the government asks for information, we're going to be very public about it. Unless sometimes they give you an order where you're not allowed to tell anybody.
Because you come from that space when you started your career in like, okay, pedophiles can use the internet to be able to corner children and abduct children. So now that's something that with a encrypted service like what you've built now, that's definitely a possibility that people just use those things maliciously.
Yeah, the thing is, the difference with us, we're not marketing it as an encrypted messaging service. We're doing it as you need a disposable phone number. And you're still buying it with your credit card. Like, this isn't about being anonymous. It's not about, keeping your messages secret or private, even though they're encrypted on our system. We can't read your messages. But your text messages in normal are in clear. If you use AT&T or Bell or Rogers or whatever, I mean, those messages are going, in the clear. I mean, there's a new protocol called RCS that Google's that's come out with where they are encrypted. But you got to assume all that communication isn't, right? So it isn't like a Signal where it's free that anybody can sign up and just start having encrypted messages. It's a paid for service. So there is those breadcrumbs. The service really is for, I don't want to give my real phone number to this person. I want to give them this phone number that has a life cycle. And once I'm done with that person, I can cycle it. Or if they graduate to my circle of trust, I can give them my real phone number. So that's the intent, right? The side effect is if you and me both have a River phone number and I send you a message, it doesn't go through the texting service. It goes directly through ours, and it is end-to-end encrypted.
So it allows you to be safe. It's more about your safety than about the connectedness of safety.
Right. Yeah. So that's what we're focusing on. At first it was all about you know, how can we make it, even if we had a government order, that we couldn't give them the messages? Sort of like Proton with their mail. Like, they don't have the private keys. So there's no way for them to give the government your messages in the clear. Now, they can tell you where you've connected from, and they can tell who you've talked to, but the contents of the message they can't, because that's the way they do it. So we were building the chat application to be like that. But I mean, Signal's really good for that. And, that's why we migrated into the phone number space to go, like, even my wife said, like, I like to sell stuff on Kijiji, and people are going, hey, I want to phone you when I'm here. Well, I really don't want to give them my real phone number. Right? And I mean, there's services that do it, but they're all a little clunky. So we're trying to make it very easy to be able to provision a phone number, be able to use it, be able to recycle it. You can keep it as long as you want, or you can just recycle and get a new one after you're done with it.
All on the same device without having the other person download an app or use that makes it really easy.
Exactly, because they're texting that number. It's coming into the River app, and then you text them back, but it just goes to their straight texting. So that makes it perfect. Plus, it does call forwarding. Like, if you buy some of the premium ones, that if they call you, it'll actually forward to your real number and ring, but they don't know your real number, right? So you can have it so it goes directly to voicemail. So, Ben's bugging me all the time. I can have it go right to voicemail, or I can have it forward to my real number, or I can just ignore you.
It's like having a virtual VPN for your phone.
Yeah, sort of. Like, it's gonna let people empower their own contacts. So you can go into your contacts, and you can say, okay, I want this to go directly to voicemail, forward me, or ignore. But you also can do it on your phone numbers. Like, you can have more than one. So you can have 3 or 4 phone numbers if you want to. And, maybe this phone number goes directly to voicemail, this only forwards, and this one only ignores. So you can kind of do it per phone number or per contact, and there you go. And see, on the weekend, then you just shut it off. Like, you'd actually say, no notifications from this person. So if you're not using the app, you'll get a notification that I just got a text from you. But I can actually shut that off so I don't even see the notification. So when I want to see the text from you, I go into the app and look and go, okay, Ben's texted me. But it doesn't, because you know what it's like when you get a notification, you got to look at it right now. Ding, the phone, I got to look at it, right? Like, so we want to be able to calm that down. So if you work on the weekday and you give your weekday phone number out, and on the weekends you don't want to have that, you can shut off all those notifications and you can check it at your leisure. I mean, I remember back in the BlackBerry days when we were doing Cybersecure, a lot of our contract work for Microsoft, I either get a message or an MSN message because somebody was bidding on a contract and they needed some security work. So we always had to be connected. And I remember after Cybersecure was over, after we sold that, retiring the BlackBerry because I had that whole ding, got to pick it up because it could be work. We're back to that now with our modern phones, but, I'm trying even personally to have those digital diets and quiet times. It's good just to separate when you're online and when you're not.
That's why I don't have a smartwatch. I had a smartwatch for a time, and it stressed me the heck out because I'd constantly get a message where you're just talking and then you see it light up on your wrist, and you're like, oh, God.
That comes to a good point, because I did have a smartwatch for a while, because you get into meetings, they go long, you don't know you have another meeting, so you miss it. But back in the day, I mean, growing up, people would look at their watch meant that they were bored or they had somewhere else to be. So it's sort of a pet peeve of mine when I'm in a meeting and somebody keeps doing this because there's a notification. It's like, you got somewhere else to be? And I know that's not what they're doing, but sort of in my head, I'm going,
It's disrespectful.
Yeah, like, why do you always check? Like, you're in the meeting with me. To me, it's like you're bored and want to be somewhere else, even though it's just, if they pulled their phone out, it'd be like, okay, they're just pulling their phone out because there's something important coming in. But because they do this, it's like, you got somewhere else to go. So it's my own problem, but yeah, it drives me crazy.
That comes back to the sociality of it, being able to talk to another human without having the interruption of, oh, our phones are ringing, or we're getting a text, or we're constantly not looking at each other, not making eye contact.
Well, the thing is that's more important than this, right? So say I have a call that I know that's important, more important maybe than the meeting, because maybe there's a crisis in the family or something.
We just took a break. I had a call with my doctor.
Right. So it's like, okay, I'm putting the phone here because, my doctor may call, or my father may call, or my wife may call. So sorry, but I pre-do that. Like, and if it's not them, I'll be looking at it. And if it's not them, I'm not going to pick it up. But if I don't have one of those sort of crisis modes, then it's better to shut the ringer off, put it in your pocket, and pay attention than that social interruption of this or this.
think we're do you think we're bad at that now? Too many people are addicted to our phones and don't have that relationship with others.
It will be interesting in 10 years what the digital habits or protocols are. What is acceptable.
Because I think the extreme is always like the end of Wall-E, where you've got the 300-pound guy rolling around in a chair with a screen right in front of his face. But that seems to be a possibility with, like, we've always got our phone on us. We're always whipping it out. Check Facebook, check Twitter, check whatever.
And we can never have a moment of peace. Like if you're shoe shopping with your wife and she's in there, instead of sort of sitting there and people watch, we're on our phone absorbing the latest doom. Right? Like we're always connected. We're always absorbing. I mean, it used to disappoint me. I go downstairs and the kids would be watching a movie with a friend and they were all on their phones, not watching the movie. Like they weren't, there's that sort of moment where you share that movie together, but none of them watched it because they're all on the phone. Now, sometimes people say there's a movement of people buying the flip phone, right? And they don't even have texting. They just have calling, and some people doing that. But I'm not sure how widespread that is. Like, will there get to the point where this generation realize that social interruption's not good, or are we kind of just screwed, right? So we got to have that dopamine hit every second. We always have to be connected. Like, younger people come over to the house, and if they're not being directly engaged, they're on their phone instead of listening to the conversation. Like when we were kids, you would go out with your parents to supper with other adults, and you'd have to sit there quietly and listen. And as you get older, sometimes you'd actually get to engage in conversation. But it taught you to sort of be in the moment and enjoy that social construct, even though it may be a little boring as children. But now there's none of that. Kids go out and, everybody's got an iPad or a phone. And, if it's not directly super interesting to you, even at a dinner party, you'll go with a bunch of adults and there'll be 3 people in the corner doom scrolling. Like, is that a good thing? I don't think so, but maybe that's okay. But that's where we're going, that we always have to be entertained.
That's something we've struggled with the kids, because Sawyer being autistic, like his tablet is his comfort. I mean, he's learned a ton from it. He's learned and helped a lot of his communication because he's largely nonverbal. But we've noticed now with Ezra, our youngest, he wants to be on a phone. He wants to be on a tablet. I'm like, okay, well, that's Sawyer's comfort. That's not for him, because Ezra clearly has ADHD like I do. It's a dopamine hit. I need that. He wakes up in the morning, he crawls in our bed. I'm ashamed to say this. He crawls in our bed and he says, phone. I'm like, I don't want to give you a phone first thing in the morning. You don't need to be consuming content first thing in the morning. What other people have curated for, like, exist. Go color, go draw, go build blocks and knock them over. And that's something we're trying to encourage more of, because it can be so you can learn. There's a ton that you can learn out there. But I think on your brain, and probably your brain chemistry, it can be quite detrimental to how you think and how you experience the world.
Well, there's a dopamine addiction that's happening, that people need that all the time. And what parts of creative play are being destroyed? I remember in grade 6, with the older kids in the neighborhood, we all got hatchets and we went out in the woods and we cut down cedar trees. We built a camp. How much less is that happening because the kids would rather just sit at home and doom scroll? With us, TV was Saturday morning cartoons and then they were over, and there really wasn't much to watch the rest of the time. So, TV addiction wasn't a big thing. And when you watched a movie, it was a special event because you rented a VCR player with a few movies and, you made popcorn and it was a family event, right? The rest of the time was creative play. Sometimes that was mischief play, don't get me wrong. But, it was coloring, it was building camps, it was going on bike rides, it was making dams. It was doing those things, and how much of that doesn't happen, like the ad hocness of that doesn't happen anymore. But you're talking about brain chemistry. I mean, a real interesting article I read in National Geographic, they took over 100 studies and proved that the chemistry in your brain changes when you're out in the woods. And, something I've done a presentation for scouts, I've done it for ATV clubs. And they've actually proven, especially after 3 days, because after we were in Iceland, and about day 3, we felt high. We weren't drinking, we weren't taking drugs, there was no mushrooms we were picking on the side of the road, but we just had this elation. And when I came back, I really wanted to know why. Was it because we were out of the routine of the day, right? I didn't know. But this article I found was about how the brain chemistry changes even a half an hour. Like day 3, like when you go camping, you're out in the woods, there's this sort of switch in your brain. And they've actually proven it with blood tests and brain monitoring and all that. But just being in green space changes your brain for the good. So how much of that doesn't happen because now the kids are on the phone and don't take the walk in the woods? It even said that people like in a metropolitan area that live by green space is 30% less cancer. Right? Just because it does something to the body. You think of modern life, it's all about right angles. You got buildings, you've got people, you've got cars, you've got noises. When did we evolve to live in these condensed conditions that you got to be on all the time? You're bumping into people, you're talking over people, you're on the phone. Really we were in the woods and we just had to worry about who was with us and what other sort of sounds. Is there a bear or something's going to eat me, or the tribe next door that's going to come get me? That's our natural habitat. And I think our brain actually relaxes when we're in the woods. Like when we're in the city, even though we're relaxing, we're still at a heightened state where we change when we're in the woods. And that's that feeling. Like I feel so refreshed. Well, it's true. And they've proven scientifically that it's good for you. So I always worry about a lot of those kids that live like in a Fredericton or a St. John, that the woods isn't that far away, that maybe they don't go play in the park because it's just as easy to do this. Right? I don't know.
I've seen, and I'd like to look it up more to see if it has been proven scientifically, if there's any studies on it. But with regards to people who do live in those city centers, developing zoochosis. You know what zoochosis is?
No.
Animals, when they are trapped in a box, basically, they'll go crazy because they are trapped in this box, the same routine every single day. Is not their natural habitat. And humans apparently have started to develop zoochosis in their modern lives in cities because we're not made to live in a city, right? You have the same routine every single day, and then people are going loopy, going crazy because, and I think that the result of that would be the anxieties, the depressions, the medications that you end up being on because you are living outside of the norm. And I think it's no secret that so many people are stuck in jobs they don't like, unable to pay their bills, unable to pay rent, unable to, especially this newest generation, unable to move forward. We were talking earlier about your son hardly being able to afford a house despite having a well-paying job, working really hard. And so this next generation is really struggling with that zoochosis of, okay, I'm stuck on this hamster wheel, this proverbial hamster wheel, doing the same thing every single day. For what end? They're not outside like we have growing vegetables. They're not producing something. They're not artists. And I hope that AI or things can take over some of those menial jobs, those call center jobs, although I hate AI call centers, to be able to favorably give people more time to be able to interact outside, to go ATVing, to go do more things rather than have to worry about paying their bills.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never seen that, but I know modern life does put pressures on that we haven't really evolved to match. Even a couple hundred years ago, you think of what the lifestyle of a person was, and that sort of slowly evolved as we went. And all of a sudden, in the last 200 years, a lot of problems have been taken away from us. In evolutionary, it's about survival of the fittest. So we're built to solve problems and to tackle challenges. And a lot of those survival issues aren't there anymore. So, genetically, how do we deal with that? How does the human makeup, even though we say this is the way we should act and should be the way we feel, how does that, our programming, deal with living in a city, in a small apartment where the routine is exactly the same? And, for some people, that's probably very comforting. There's probably people that, genetically it's all about the fight, right? I'm worried about what's going to eat us, so I'm out to kill the bear. right? Or I need to go, get an animal to feed my family. And those type of people probably go a little loopy or zooey doing that. But then, we also have a herd mentality. People do better together. I mean, there's outliers and lone wolves, but we do better together. So does the big city sort of soothe our herd mentality where we do enjoy the routine and not have to worry about that? And it's a relief. So I don't know. That's an interesting concept to look for. I mean, I like the outdoors, and I like to visit a city, but I like to leave. But there's a lot of people that just love living in the city. So it's just interesting. Like, technology and civilization matched with the foundational way our genetics are programmed, is this a train wreck coming, especially being accelerated with AI? It'll be interesting. Do we rise above it, or does it destroy us?
And all those isms and whatnot make it difficult, because I think, like you said, we've built this sort of social construct of our cities and sociology, and I think you look around the world and other cultures and other countries have created different societies than we have. I mean, we're inundated with largely Canadian and US politics, somewhat Australian and UK, but largely Canada and the US, and so we're kind of stuck in this mindset. But then, like we mentioned earlier, we've got the two subsets of culture. You've got city life, and then you've got rural life, which are arguably, if you talk to a city person who's lived in a city their entire life, they have a completely different outlook on life. They have different ideals, they have different ideas, and it's just like, oh, we are very different. Or even within Canada, having like Alberta or New Brunswick, like those are two very different cultures of people.
And what we don't do as humans is realize that's okay. Right? It's one side is trying to impose their will on the other, because that's just the way humans have always been, forever. And it's probably a survival instinct, because I'm surviving because this is the way I survive. Thus, you all should. But we need to be smart enough to go, people have different tempos and likes and lifestyles, and they all need to be supported. But we're not very good at it. We're better at, this is my team. My team needs to win, and your team needs to lose. And, you talk to people, and they don't think of it that way until you start talking to them and go, well, I disagree with them. They shouldn't think that way. Well, they do, and that's probably okay. And doesn't mean you need to think like them either. But we're not very good at that, and that's, a root of our problems. That's the way we've been forever.
That's what Canada has been good at. Like, the multiculturalism of Canada has been beautiful, and is beautiful to be able to be accepting of all cultures and religions and ethnicities. But I think in recent years, we've really become intolerant of everything. And it makes it difficult to be able to, I remember Nicole and I were talking the other day about when her parents or her grandparents or great-grandparents moved from Holland. They moved here, and how proud they were to be Canadians. But how many people are proud to be Canadian, or proud to be an American, or more disappointed to be an American, or try to hold their ideals, whether they immigrate here and try to hold and maintain culture from other countries? Not that they can't, and we have a ton of different cultures, but I think there are different ideals and religious ideals that can get people in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, especially when ideals go against the law of the land. I mean, to me, each to their own. What people believe in, what they do at home is whatever they like to, as long as it doesn't break the laws of the land. And sometimes we see that a little bit.
But we established earlier that the laws of the land are created by people in cities who have different ideals than you. And the laws like the 2035 EV mandate, that is to become law, is something you don't agree with.
I was more.
I know, I'm challenging you.
No, when I was thinking of it, I was thinking more of violence and things against fundamental humanity that is acceptable in other countries that isn't acceptable here. Right? I wasn't thinking sort of the broader sort of details of regulations like guns and EVs and how you can grow plants, but basically how you treat other humans. Yeah. That's where I was.
That's where the libertarian ideals sort of come from, where as long as you don't hurt other people or aren't hurting other people, whether it's with your business or personally, you should be okay. But there are other countries and cultures that don't believe the same, and don't respect women or don't respect homosexuals or whatnot. And so to have that in and inundated in Canadian culture makes it very difficult to be able to have a productive society when you're trying to fight against those differing ideals.
Yeah.
Not to go political.
No.
You can go
No,
very political and religious with that.
And
but
and the thing is, you can drive yourself nuts with that too. And the two-edged sword is, you have your circle of friends and family that you enjoy, and you celebrate what you believe and what you do. And at what point do things that differ enough that you do fight against those things? With the media, I'm going to blame the media for a minute. I mean, they do like the clickbait that makes us all sort of riled up, because then we read more and click more. I mean, that's sort of proven, right? And, there's a lot of people that say, well, I don't read the news anymore and I feel a lot better. So what's the balance of not reading the news and sticking your head in the sand versus sort of having your fingers on the pulse just enough you know what's going on, but you're confident in your circle and you just continue life because you're not going to influence that anyway? Like it's really hard, right?
have we developed a relative God complex with social media and being so connected? Because years ago you were connected with your immediate community, maybe you met your local politician, but now we feel we're entitled to or should have opinions globally and affecting change around the world. Whereas if we were just focused on our communities and making our communities better and helping your neighbor rather than the latest thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, but what's really neat is I've been watching All in the Family, Archie Bunker from, it started in 1970. So, it started 2 years before I was born. And me and a couple of guys from work, we've been watching it every couple of weeks. And what's really interesting, I mean, they use some language that we don't use anymore, and they hit some subjects, but the problems are the same. Like, I watched it and went, wow, this could be today. Has much really changed? What's changed is we all thought our opinions were important, but that was at the barbecue or around the pool or whatever. Now we have a medium to tell everybody our opinions. So I don't think that's changed. When I watched, I hate to say it, the Archie Bunker show, it's the same. Like you watch that and go, this could have been made today. Like all the same things with politics, the left and the right, all that stuff's like, wow, like this is very relevant, 50 years ago. Their subjects are relative now. We haven't cured any, sad part, we haven't cured any of these problems. The problems they're talking about then are still there. But now we have these networks that we see it all the time. Instead of just turning the news on or going down to the bar or going to the, the family barbecue, it's all the time. And have we developed a way to go, just because that's in person's opinion, it's just like we heard at the barbecue. Like, don't take it so personally and have to fight. Like, that person's wrong and I'm right and I now need to pick a fight. I think social media has aggravated that because it's two-way. Where it was on the television, you could just yell at the TV and it was over. But now I can yell at somebody and they hear it on the other end, and now that starts a fight. So I don't think it's got any worse. After watching that, it changed my mind, going, wow, we haven't solved anything in 50 years. We fight about the same thing. We just have more places to talk about our differences, and we have more people to fight with. And I think more we stop fighting with each other, especially people you don't know. Like, it doesn't matter. I got this in a little bit, I got a little deep the last political cycle. I got on Facebook a little bit. I was trying to push my opinions a bit because I was really worried about the election. I wasn't very happy the way it turned out. But I put some stuff out there, and the nastiness that I got, like I was putting some of the stuff I was putting out just to have a conversation, and the nastiness that, God forbid I think that way. And, how do you debate with people when they attack you personally? Or, so that's the part that social media has really brought up, is the worst of it, because I've never seen you or met you, so I can call you whatever I want because you think this. It means you're automatically like this.
This isn't a nuanced opinion. This is
right. Where around the barbecue, you got to look the other person in the face, and the next barbecue, they're going to be there too. So you got to be a little more civil. So it's brought the worst out of us that way. And I think that was always there, but you did it around the kitchen table with people you know. Oh, I can't believe such and such thinks that way. He's such an idiot. Right? Well, that person's not there to hear it. It's not captured. He'll never hear it. And you kind of vent and you all sort of talk about the idiot down the road. Well, now they talk about the idiot down the road on social media, and they bring all these people in that don't know any of these people, and that amplifies it all. And that's what's bad. But I challenge anybody, like, go to Amazon, buy All in the Family. I can't find it streaming. Watch it and go, whoa. Like, we're in the same place we were 50 years ago. We just have a bigger avenue to fight with people. Like, it's crazy. Like, it really is. Like, we just sit there and go, like, they just had an episode with Meathead and Archie fighting about Nixon and about why, the left and the right. And it was just like, whoa, like, it's the same stuff's happening now. It was so cool. It was like, I actually felt a lot better. Like, wow, maybe we're not in a downward spiral with this stuff. We just have more people to fight with. So stop fighting with those people.
just a larger echo chamber rather than just your family barbecue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ryan, I appreciate this. Thank you for taking the time.
I enjoyed every minute of it, and we need to get on the ATV again because that was super fun, or at least get the cameras out. But your family's growing. It's nice.
Garden's growing.
It's nice to see what you're doing here and keep it up. So I'm looking forward to seeing you again.
I'm excited to see what happens with River and how it expands as it launches further. And because you're in beta test right now.
Yes. Thanks a lot. See you next time.
That was so corny. I can't end it there.